Are you a healthcare professional looking for a trusted concussion resource? Then you've come to the right place. From her New York City studios, welcome to Concussion Corner with your host, Dr. Jessica Schwartz.
How has our understanding of concussion recovery evolved over the past 2 decades, and what does that mean for clinical care today? In this episode of the Concussion Corner Podcast, I sit down with Dr. Stephen Broglio, Director of the University of Michigan Concussion Center and President of the Concussion and Sport Group. We explore how longitudinal research is reshaping timelines, recovery expectations, and the importance of individualized, data-informed concussion management. From research to real-world application, the conversation is essential for anyone working in the brain injury concussion space. My name is Dr. Jessica Schwartz. I'm a brain injury survivor, physical therapist, and founder of Concussion Corner, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin. Dr. Broglio, welcome to the Concussion Corner Podcast.
Jess, thanks for having me on. I'm glad we were able to connect and make this happen.
I mean, it totally filled my bucket when I was out in Milwaukee. I can say that I've been to Milwaukee now in the spring of 2025 now, but you guys had your Concussion Sport Group midterm meeting, and it was so fantastic to A, be stateside, B, my airline miles took me to Milwaukee for a very affordable price, so thank you for that. And two, it was really just phenomenal to be in the room where it happened, very Hamilton-esque, where everyone just showed up, showed out, here to support the concussion community and the brain injury community. So you guys really threw a wonderful conference, and it was just so meaningful to see people show up, especially in this post-COVID times where, you guys had 18 countries and over 200 folks show up. So fantastic to reconnect, and happy to have you on the podcast for the first time.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for the kind words about the meeting in Milwaukee. It really exceeded our expectations. And for those that missed it, really the intent of that meeting wasn't to develop new guidelines as we do kind of with our consensus meeting every 4 or so years. It was more about how do these guidelines apply to clinicians. And we had some case studies and we had some science that kind of came out of what was published from the Amsterdam meeting a few years ago. And we're hoping to do more of them. We got a great response, and we're hoping to do more.
Yeah. And, I've been to enough of these conferences all over the world. And, at the end of the day, even Dr. McRae said, hey, I've been saying the same thing for 30 years. But at the same time, we're still getting more data and looking at things from different lenses. And you've been such a big part of that. And for me, one of my biggest surprises was actually hearing about baseline assessments for neurodiverse individuals. It just shows that we're really looking at population health, from a public health standpoint, 360, more than just, the soccer player or the FIFA or Olympic top 1% of the world's Olympic gold medalist type thing. So it was just really wonderful to see next day knowledge translation be able to be implemented from something that was put on in person. So really just kudos to you guys.
Yeah, and I think that's a marker of just how science has evolved, particularly in the concussion space in the last 20 or 25 years. I mean, we used to have a sample of 25 or 30 people, and we would just make this broad sweeping generalization that this applies to everybody. And even though that sample historically has been white male football players, and we just said this applies to men, women, boys, girls, all sports, all diversities. I think we have then sort of transitioned to sort of group level, and I think we recognize, men and women have different outcomes following concussion. We're learning that race plays a role in how people report and how they recover. And then I think sort of the next step, and we're starting to trend in this direction, is what's the individual care. And I think some of the big data that's being collected and developed and analyzed around the world is going to allow us to do that. So if you fit this race, this gender, this ethnicity, with this concussion history, these premorbid factors, this is sort of what you can expect or how to be managed. So we're not quite there yet, but we're definitely trending in that.
Fantastic. And we have a bunch of young TBI researchers that actually listen into the podcast. We're in over 60 countries. I would love for you to be able to kind of give people just a little bit of a lens. We just actually interviewed Mario Bazzini, who's one of the editors of BJSM. And he's been doing this for 36 years, and you've been in the game for a while as well. And I think just to kind of see the trajectory of kind of what your career path has looked like would be fantastic. Young, Steve Broglio to, dean of a major university. So let's get into it.
Wow. Okay. So we're going into the Wayback Machine, I think. I would say my concussion research career started probably in the late 90s-ish. So I was an undergraduate student at the University of North Carolina. I was very fortunate to be matched with a young Kevin Guskowitz. So he was my mentor. He was a second-year faculty member, I think, when I came there. We had no idea what he would become, but we all knew he was going to be phenomenal at whatever he did. If you've ever met him, he just has that air about him, and the nicest guy on top of it. So I did a research project with him my senior year. and got tacked on to some other work that he was doing. I then did my master's degree at the University of Pittsburgh under Scott Leppart, and then did my doctorate with Mike Ferraro down at the University of Georgia. And at that time, kind of in that, 4 or 5 year, 6 year period, it was early days of concussion research. I mean, if you think of Mike McRae and Kevin Guskowitz's 2 JAMA papers, those were 2001. And so we were just starting to scratch the surface of what is concussion, what does normal recovery look like. So a lot of the work I did was around kind of what are the best tools to evaluate concussion, whether that's sideline or in the clinic, and how valid are they? This is right when a lot of the computer testing was. From there, after I graduated Georgia, I went to the University of Illinois, and if people remember, the head impact telemetry system had been developed, and this is this sensor array that fits inside of a football helmet. And people were starting to explore whether there was a threshold for concussion. So if you get hit with a certain amount of force that causes an acceleration to the head above some number, just simple, yes, no, you have a concussion. We're gonna solve this in 2 years. We just need enough number. So here we are, about 20 years later, with millions of head impacts collected. There is no threshold. It's highly variable. There's some theory around why that is. But we spent about 10 years or so at the high school level trying to collect these data, and we did a number of analyses on head impact exposure that high school students sustain over a season, and it varies obviously by player position. We looked at different offensive and defensive schemes. We looked at rules changes, limiting the number of contact sessions per week and what that does to impact exposure. So I'm really proud of the work that we did in that space. But it became really apparent, particularly after 2007, but really heavily as we got into like the 2010s, that people were really interested in the work. So if people remember, it was January 18th of 2007 that the New York Times published a front page article on CTE. And so this was tied into the Mike Webster case. I think Andre Waters might have been included in that article. So we had this sort of like sports side of what was going on, but simultaneously the U.S. was involved in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. And so the signature wound of those two engagements were TBIs. So we had this military side that had this confluence of civilian and military coming together around an injury. And a lot of funding started with that. So I was very fortunate to work with Mike McRae at Medical College of Wisconsin, Tom McAllister at Indiana U, and put in a proposal to the NCA and the DoD for what became the CARE Consortium, the concussion assessment. And the goal there really has been, we called it to understand the natural history of concussion. The first phase was really designed to understand kind of what does recovery look like across all sports, all genders, immediately following injury. But the big vision has always been what happens to these individuals 20, 30, 40, 50 years after the fact, and what this brain health looks like. So we've been working on that for 11 years now, and it's been great. It's been a privilege to work with those guys. Paul Pasquina at Uniformed Services University joined a few years ago, and just really enjoying every moment.
Fantastic. As you've kind of moved into this transitional leadership, praised by many, and we're looking at integrity with putting research out there for the concussion space, what structural or ethical changes are implemented with the concussion and sport group of today to make sure that things are as transparent as possible for people all over the world?
Yeah, great. So for the audience that doesn't know, I was elected to be the president of concussion sport. I became the president-elect in 2024 and took over the presidency this year. And I'll serve this year and next. Then Tina Master, who's over at Penn, will take over. I'll give a little bit of history, and then I'll try to address kind of your question there. The concussion sport group was started in 2000. And it was in the build-up to the Olympic Games, where a number of international organizations, were trying to unify their concussion protocols so they kind of had matching protocols going into the games. And that first paper was published in 2021. And then they met again 4 years later. It obviously became a little more robust as the interest around concussion grew and more people became involved, and sort of has evolved along those times. Paul McCrory has sort of became the de facto leader of that group around the second or third meeting. I was still in my training at that point, so I'm not exactly sure. And I think this is public, and I don't think I'm saying anything out of turn here, but Paul faced some challenges around some plagiarism claims that were tied to him being editor for the British Journal of Sports Medicine. In my opinion, I don't believe that he or anybody else kind of tied to that original leadership for concussion sport did anything, I don't know, dark or kind of subversive or whatever term you want to throw in here around the guidelines that were published. My sense as I sat in those rooms, whether they were the research presentations or whether it was developing the tools, was everybody was really in it to try to have the best clinical care. Always differences of opinion. And that happens, even today with, science as good as is, people just differ on how they think about things and how they're going to manage cases. But Paul, I think, he did some things he shouldn't have done for sure. And then he willfully stepped away from the leadership position in concussion sport. At that point, there was no formal structure to the organization. So in 2024, the group was reformed in the United States. We now have formal bylaws that are available on our website, concussionandsportgroup.com. And people can see kind of what the structure is, how people are elected. We have a full board of directors. We have different committees that work on communications or education, our science committee. And we've tried our best to make it as transparent as we can going forward to make sure people understand how they can engage with the group, how the group comes up with the consensus guidelines, and the associated tools that go with it. I'll readily admit, we've had some dark days, but I think we've turned that corner and I think we're headed.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we give a little bit more attention to the concussion and sport group at the end of this podcast. But as we're about the halfway mark now, I just wanted to swing back around and just talk about that 2003 paper that you published with Mike McRae and from the NCAA paper. And that was the pinnacle. And again, we know that like 8 to 17 years is what knowledge translation is from white paper to clinical translation and clinical use, 8 to 17 years. So we're in about that time frame. And you debunked your own research again because you're asking better questions. And for me, I break it down as simple because my job is to promote what you guys are doing in the research and make sure it's equitable across all over the world to make sure we're translating it to clinic. But at the end of the day, we have to know what we're looking at so we know what we're looking for. And I say that all over, and I'll repeat it because it needs to be said twice. We have to know what we're looking at so we know what we're looking for, and that's been so important for the concussion research that's been done globally. With that being said, the original paper with 7 to 10 days on return. Again, now we're doing comprehensive targeted physical examinations on people that are making sure to look at the clinical profiles of concussion, looking at the patient 360, making sure we're looking at premorbid mental health history, premorbid injury history, premorbid, psychiatric history of either ADHD or other things that are going on. Where are we in terms of the update that you and Mike published with some of the CARE Consortium data? And we've had Brian Hainline on. We'll link those podcasts in so people can learn a little bit more about CARE. But where are we now with the research that you've done, really 360 from the 2003 article?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the natural history of concussion papers is the one you're referencing here. Just to give some context to it, for a long time, we have said the average return to play time is 14 days. And that's been around for, 10 or 15 years or something. That 14-day window sort of breaks down into two components. One is we have about a 6 to 7 day window where people are symptomatic. Under normal circumstances, we see this big spike after 24 hours or so, and then it sort of trends down over those 7 or so days. After, I'm trying to remember which CISG meeting it was. I think it was after the first Zurich meeting, they implemented this 7-day sort of return to play protocol. So that tacked on an extra 7 days from, historically, somebody would go to zero or tell you they were zero on concussions or on symptoms, and we would just put them back. Now once after that meeting came in and we had this return to play protocol, that tacked on another 5, 6, 7 days as people kind of worked through the protocol. The paper you're referencing that we published a couple years ago, we found that the average return to play time is 14 days. That has not changed. But if you think about what does average represent, that's 50%. It's the middle. So that leaves another 50% of people that are going to extend beyond 14 days. And we've all dealt with concussed athletes, and we know that particularly for our really high performers that are very high strung, and they start dipping into like day 15, 16, 17, 18, and then all of a sudden they get labeled as like a slow recoverer or it's a bad concussion. And we see this sort of spin up of the psychological symptoms that start overlaying with the concussion symptoms. And those two things, I mean, we all know this, we've all seen it. It just becomes really hard to disentangle, like, what is the concussion and then what is the psychology of the injury. So what we found in the paper you're referencing is that it's about 85 or 90% of people recover within 4 weeks, 1 month. So we sort of reframed or tried to reframe what was considered normal recovery and said normal recovery can take up to 1 month. And then beyond that, we can start dipping into the persisting symptoms space, which is actually pretty consistent with the literature around that. So it's not we have changed what recovery time is. It's the same that it's always been, but we're trying to redefine kind of how we think about it. So somebody may be back on the field in 10 days, and that's just kind of more on the mild end of the spectrum. Somebody may take 27, 28 days, and that's more on the longer end of the spectrum. But it's all kind of under the normal recovery.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Did you know that sport helmets are rated on a 5-star system similar to cars? And the safest helmets have nothing to do with price, brand, or availability? Since 2011, Virginia Tech researchers have been providing unbiased helmet ratings that allow consumers to make informed decisions when purchasing helmets. The helmet ratings are the culmination of over a decade of research identifying which helmets best reduce concussion risk. This work is done as part of Virginia Tech's service mission and is 100% independent of any funding or influence from helmet manufacturers. Our mission at Concussion Corner is to expose you, the listener, to trusted spaces in the concussion arena that translate to clinic next day. Please visit the Virginia Tech Helmet Lab website in our show notes or at bit.ly/Virginia Tech Helmets and spread the word to aid in lowering concussion risk in your community. Thank you for tuning in, and let's begin the show. And it's an excellent conversation to have just from a rehabilitative standpoint, because at the end of the day, we're not telling high ankle sprain that they're going to get back in 7 to 10 days or 14 days. We have a progression. You've got to be able to do single leg stands, isometrics, and we need to be able to do some plyos and bump you around a little bit. And people understand that. And for whatever reason, with brain injuries, specifically concussion, we were like, it's a time-based thing. And it's so harmful to the community, because at the end of the day, if you tell someone 7 to 10 days, they're going to be looking at the clock. That's why I don't give blood pressure cuffs to most of my geriatric patients, because they will take their blood pressure every 5 minutes and tell me their blood pressure, and then they get anxious. And it's the same with concussion. We want to make sure that we give people realistic timeframes, but I also want to talk here about the population of athlete that you're working with and where that data is coming from, because I think it's important for the public to hear this. So specifically NCAA athletes, Division I to Division III, and then Department of Defense side of things with active service members and midshipsmen, and folks that are all around that same age. At the end of the day, they have athletic trainers and medical teams. So what does that return to play progress look like? And what is being monitored, managed, and assessed during that 14 days to 28 days? Because I want to make sure people understand that if they're in the civilian population, you're not just sitting and doing nothing. We want to make sure you have an acute active approach in terms of having good care and what that looks like.
Yeah, you're raising a great point here. So I don't remember. We had 30 sites that participated in the CARE Consortium, so I don't know the details of all 30 sites off the top of my head. But broadly, I would feel comfortable saying, just as you said, if you're an NCAA athlete, you're going to have access to an athletic trainer and probably a whole suite of other providers just about 24/7. And if you're on the military side, so at the military academies, they're NCAA institutions, so they have varsity athletes there as well. But every one of those cadets is required, it's mandated, that they have some physical activity, club, sport that they participate in. That's in addition to just the regular military training that they do. So the combatives and the boxing and those types of things. The cadets, what we would refer to as the non-varsity cadets, they obviously have access to medical care when they need it, but it's more like a clinic. It's almost like a student health type of service on campus. So they don't quite have the same access to medical care that the athletes do, but it's still much more robust than, let's just say, the average person that slips on the ice and hits their head. What we did find in that paper that we've been talking about is that the more times that you go see your athletic trainer or a medical provider in those first 2 weeks actually is predictive of your recovery. So, like I said, I can't tell you what's happening during those visits, but I can imagine that it is a lot of people are starting to implement exercise earlier in the recovery process now. So Historically, we said, your symptoms have to be at 0 before we're going to start exercise. Now, the latest recommendations are 24 to 48 hours of kind of rest, relax, don't do anything stressful. And then day 3, you're probably up and going for a walk. And then day 4, you might be on a bike. And day 5, you might be doing a light jog. And I'm sort of making this up, but it is this sort of progressive increase in intensity and stress that we are moving these athletes through to try to get them back onto the field. So I think it is for the average person that maybe, they have the concussion, or they go to ED, or they go to primary care or urgent care. And then they get referred to a clinic, maybe it's a week later. It's just a different process because you don't have somebody working with you day in and day out on kind of how things are going, and we can kind of fine tune that recovery process for somebody on a daily basis, as opposed to, hey, you're here, come back and see me in a month, because that's when I have it.
Yeah. And I think, again, it gives people kind of like a lens of like, hey, these folks are getting premier care 360 from physicians to athletic trainers to therapists, the whole nine. And at the end of the day, they're also some of our top athletes in the world that are trained, that are healthy. They don't have other comorbidities. This wasn't from a car crash or intimate partner violence or slip and fall that had some other concomitant injuries with it. So I think we have to keep that in mind for our civilian populations and just make sure that when we're seeing these numbers that, the stressors of maybe having to go through no fault or having to go through car insurance or employer conversations that may be uncomfortable because you're not able to tolerate screens, which is like what all we have here. I have 3 screens here today. So I think it's just fantastic to connect to. As we wrap up here, we had some recent events here. And then in part 2, we're going to kind of open up the CISG a little bit more. And I want to talk a little bit more about membership and what that means. But we had some recent events here in New York City where I live. I know you're in Michigan. And unfortunately, it was related to a person who went into a building at 345 Park Avenue, not too far from where I reside, shot people and killed people in the building. And his letter was talking about how he has CTE, which is obviously has not been diagnosed. It can't be diagnosed and only post-mortem. But those were his fears, and he was a football player. We have over 2/3 of our population here in the United States, and then even in the UK, that are obese or overweight. We want to make sure as concussion folks that we're pushing movement, that we're pushing safe movement, but we also want to talk about equity and inclusion and social determinants of health. And we just had Dr. Postas on, so I'll link that into the show notes as well. But, just talking about how folks in lower socioeconomic areas, if you give them the option with lower education of saying, hey, if you can take care of your family and you can sacrifice your neurocognitive health in your 40s, would you still do this? And the answer is yes in a lot of that, in those populations. With that being said, education is key for both parents, and kids are not able to, opt in because they're not of age. What do we need to let the public know, let healthcare professionals know, because these questions will come into the clinic about this conversation that should be happening in clinics all over the country?
Yeah. So I'll start with, the events in New York. I guess it's been 2 weeks now. Just tragic, regardless of why this individual chose to do it. It's just a tragic situation. I really feel for, not only the victims, but the survivors. I mean, I can only imagine. I saw some headline the other day about, sort of like a cleaning person that like came face to face with this individual and they just turned in a different direction. And I'm sure there's a lot of emotions that go on with that. You said this. The shooter left a suicide note that indicated he felt that he had CTE. To be clear, to reiterate what you said, we cannot diagnose CTE in the living. It is a post-mortem autopsy, so we may or may not find out if he had it, and that's going to be up to the New York coroner, is my understanding. I think the bottom line is whether he did or did not have it, whatever he was going through is likely very manageable from a psychiatric standpoint. And you're spot on. We certainly want to promote physical activity. We know the negative effects of not being physically active. That's very clear. And much data, physical activity is just as effective as medications for depression. So I think what I would stress, particularly to your listeners and maybe to patients that are coming in to see you and other providers, is that if you feel like you're having these problems, or as a clinician you are sort of picking up that you think your client might have these problems, is to refer them on to psychological services. And whether that's counseling or maybe they need medication or both or something else, we can manage this stuff with really good science and medicine. Right?
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, we're really wanting to elevate sports safety and not discourage it. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're not hitting kids in the head repetitively. We have a lot of data on repetitive head impacts. And at the end of the day, that's where we need to focus on. And we need to make sure sports are equitable, safe, clean air at the end of the, so I just thank you for that commentary. For the Concussion in Sport group, where can folks look into it? And then we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in part 2 to sign up for membership. And what does that mean?
Sure. So we have a website, concussion-in-sport-group.com. If you go there, I think it's on the top right-hand corner. There's a button that says Join CISG. We have a couple different membership categories, whether you have a terminal degree or a clinical degree and you are practicing or researching in the concussion space, or maybe you're a trainee or student. So there's a couple different categories there. You sort of pick the right one for you. And I would definitely encourage people to join, become members. We're definitely trying to grow our membership. I think we've been able to grow the membership by 25% since the start of the year, which has been really exciting to see for a young new organization like ourselves. And I think even more importantly, you mentioned you have a broad international audience. We're really pushing for international membership. We are an international group. I know we're based here in the U.S., but we really want a really diverse audience membership from around the world to join. So I hope people think about it. We're sort of working on some of the benefits. We have some educational tools that people can access. They're a little bit behind a login wall. And then no promises yet, but we're talking about maybe some reductions in registration for our conferences that we have, or first priority for registering for conferences. So, those things are coming. I'm not promising that those things are there yet, but that's what we're working on.
Fantastic. And where can we find Concussion Sport Group and also the University of Michigan Concussion on social media these days?
So the Concussion Center is at concussion.umich.edu. We have a LinkedIn page. You can just search for Michigan Concussion Center there. The Concussion Sport Group is not on social media. So you just have to go to our website, concussion-in-sport-group.com.
Steve, thank you so much for coming on, and I can't wait for part 2.
Thanks, Jess. Really appreciate it. And let's get on to the second half.
What a powerful conversation with Dr. Steve Broglio, from the evolution of concussion research to the renewed transparency and accountability at the Concussion Sport Group. I hope today's episode gave you a deeper insight into the past, present, and future of concussion care, especially for those of us working in the clinical trenches. If you're a clinician, educator, or researcher and want to stay connected to the global conversation, I encourage you to learn more and consider joining the Concussion in Sport Group at theconcussionsportgroup.com. It's an important way to stay current, connected, and contribute to international consensus conversations. And as always, if this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe, share it with a colleague, and leave us a review. It helps amplify these conversations across the globe. To learn more about our programs and mission-driven community and to become a part of our Teach One, Serve Many community, visit us at concussioncorner.org. Thanks again, and stay tuned for part 2 with Dr. Broglio. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Concussion Corner, hosted by Dr. Jessica Schwartz. The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and not to be used as personal medical advice. Don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Concussion Corner.